Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker. A time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. We're diving into what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you. The truth, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. I woke to the sound of bells that didn't belong to me, a hard iron clamor that pressed through the fog of sleep like a hand pushing my face underwater. The roof above me was a thatch of brown, pale shafts of light sneaking through, and everything, my clothes, my hair, the rough blanket, was woven with the sour, sweet smell of smoke. The straw beneath my shoulder blades crackled when I shifted, and something tiny skittered along my neck. When I reached up, my fingers came away with a flea, a dot of glossy black that hopped and vanished. Somewhere out of sight, a pig grunted like a grumpy uncle and bumped a wall. The whole world was already moving, and I was already late. I sat up, gagged on the thickness of the room, and coughed a string of ash out of my throat. My eyes watered in the low light. The hearth in the corner was a sunken square of embers, hot as coals in a blacksmith's hand. I didn't know where I was for a heartbeat. And then the sounds and smells braided into a certainty that made the back of my neck prickle. The bells were the churches, and the church was close, and the world outside was the Middle Ages. This wasn't a museum with friendly signs. It was just a Monday. A shape moved in the smoke, a girl with a kerchief around her hair, and she shoved a wooden bowl at me with a muttered word. Her accent swung like a door I couldn't see behind. I recognized meaning more than syllables. Pottage, a grayish stew of barley, and something green that tasted like nettles and soil. It was lukewarm and stubborn, the wooden spoon heavy in my hand. I tried to sip water from a bucket beside the hearth, but the surface filmed when I dipped the ladle. I hesitated, thinking of my modern stomach like a pampered pet that would take one sip and throw up its paws in melodrama. The girl saw my pause and raised an eyebrow. She tipped the bucket toward me and made a sipping motion. It would be worse to refuse. I drank. The water tasted of wood and river and the faint memory of livestock. Outside, the village held itself in a damp fist. The air was dewy, and the ground was mud and scattered straw and manure that made a paste with the morning. Smoke shot from holes in thatched roofs as if the cottages were breathing. Chickens performed small, self-important sprints. A dog barked at me, then barked at its bark. The bell kept ringing. People moved with purpose that came from habit. Stooping, hauling, tying, tossing, while I stood there like washed-up driftwood in a sea of competence. A man in a tunic cut from coarse wool brushed past me with 2 buckets suspended from a yoke across his shoulders, the slosh symmetrical and assured. He had shoulders like a door frame. He didn't spare me a glance. "Fetch," the girl said behind me, and pressed a smaller bucket into my hands. Her fingers were cracked and red, nails bitten back. She was not older than 15, but her gaze had a ledger's balance to it. She pointed toward the track that ran down to where the land turned into reeds and low water. The river. I learned the weight of a bucket before I learned anything else. Emptiness is deceptive. It becomes prophecy the moment water hits the wood. My arms trembled on the way back. The mud licked at my shoes. A cartwheel had carved a rut as deep as my ankle. When I stumbled, I saved the bucket. Instinct stronger than balance, and strangers laughed gently, not unkindly, as if I had just dropped a loaf in a play. By the time the bells stopped, the sky had brightened from pewter to tin, and the village had found its speed. Bread cracked like old roots beneath a knife. A woman with arms like river ropes kneaded dough on a board black with use, pushing and folding with the hypnotic intensity of prayer. She glanced up once and then went back to her work, and her ring finger left a groove in the flour where a ring might have been if rings were for people like her. A boy turned to spit with a squirrel impaled on it, the creature's tail held firm with string. The smell made me dizzy. Hunger and something like shame collided. I thought of my cupboards full of choices and felt suddenly like a thief in a pantry. Here, you ate what you had, and what you had was the day. Work was a word with 1,000 small teeth. Nothing had buttons. Everything had knots. Nothing had a handle, unless a hand had carved it. I was given a hoe, and a row, and a nod. The earth was stubborn with spring's weight, and I hacked at it like a beginner in a sword fight, blisters rising like moons under my skin. A woman alongside me worked with the rhythm of a loom. Step, lift, strike, pull. The weeds came up in clumps that smelled alive in a way I hadn't understood in years. By mid-morning, sweat slid along my spine in thin streams, and the wool tunic they'd given me scratched every inch of skin it touched. Flies found me on principle. The sun, mild to look at, had edges that cut. We broke to chew bread that was more strategy than food. A disk dense with bran and tiny stones from the mill. When I bit down, grit rasped my molars and sent a lightning bolt up into my temple. That old familiar city toothache instantly recruited into the army of medieval pain. A wedge of cheese resisted the knife, like it had opinions about being sliced. The girl handed me a cup of small beer, a smoky, weak ale, with the sourness of apples left too long. And I understood suddenly why everyone here drank it. Compared to the river, this was antiseptic and comfort. It warmed without blurring. It softened a little of the sharpness of the day. "Don't stare," the girl said softly, and I realized my gaze had latched onto a man who was missing 3 fingers. He smiled at nothing in particular as he passed, a bundle of kindling tied with twine against his chest. Once upon a time, he had made a mistake with a blade, or a mill, or a bore. Here the world was a machine with exposed gears, and skin was not as sacred as it had been where I came from. By noon, the heat had a hand around my throat. The shade was an argument under the eaves of the cottages, not a right. We took tools down to the stream to scrub mud from them, and my hands, softened by a lifetime of soap from bottles and taps with polite water, split at the creases. The girl glanced at them and clucked, then snapped a sprig from a plant I didn't recognize. She rubbed the green against the cuts, and it stung with the honesty of medicine, without mystery. If there was a doctor within a day's ride, he was busy removing a tooth with pliers or telling someone to bleed for their health, and he spoke Latin to a crowd that nodded because they had learned to nod. On the road beyond the village, a procession moved like a bruise. A lord's men, iron and leather, and horses that ate enough in a week to feed a family. They passed without looking left or right. The village quieted itself, not in deference so much as survival, like the wind had changed. Behind the riders, a cart rattled. A man in it coughed and coughed, the sound wet as sopped bread. Someone made the sign of the cross, and a woman tugged her child behind her skirts. Sickness had a personality here. It didn't simply happen. It announced itself. It took teeth and lungs and babies without apology, and left behind stories and practicalities. If you were born, there was a ledger begun in your name, with columns labeled work and luck and God. I looked at the children, bare feet like thin animals, knees bruised, eyes old. Survival was a job handed to you at birth, and never once set down, even to sleep. The church was made of stone, the color of old teeth. Its small windows, like hooded eyes. When the bell tolled for noon, we went in because you went in, because even if the words were not yours, the time was. Inside it was cool and damp, and the air smelled like beeswax and mildew and a dozen wet wool cloaks. A parish priest with hands stained by ink and soil chanted syllables that had been chanted so often they had become furniture. I didn't understand more than the shape of the sounds, but I understood the faces, upturned and surrendered. The girl stood beside me and stared at the crucifix with the intensity of a daughter watching a father speak. Faith was not a philosophy here. It was a rope in a flood, and also the flood. Mercy could be as thin as broth and as heavy as a sack of grain, and it came with taxes. Afternoon stretched itself into a rope we all had to pull on. A neighbor's cow had gone lame. 3 men and a boy wrestled with its hoof in the mud, while the owner muttered prayers and promises to patron saints. I handed what I could, feeling always the wrong weight in my palms, the wrong movements in my muscles. My back discovered new ways to hurt. The girl laughed once when I tried to lift a sack of barley like it was a piece of luggage and nearly folded in half. "You're all wrists," she said, and there was pity in it and a kind of affection, as if she were talking to a kitten that had not learned how to climb. We took a long walk toward the edge of the fields to check the traps and the hedges, and the path turned into something that insults the word path. It was roots and ruts and water that pretended to be ground until your foot tested its honesty. The forest had a smell that was equal parts rot and growth. There were mushrooms like ears and mushrooms like coins, and mushrooms with the frankrid of a warning. The girl knew their names as if they were people. This one you boil twice. This one you feed your mother-in-law if you're tired of her. She said it with a straight face, but a smile in her eyes, and I couldn't tell if the joke belonged to centuries or just to her. At a low stone wall we paused to watch a man build a hedge, not merely a boundary of branches, but a patient sculpture of living wood. He cut and bent and wove, turning each sapling into a piece of a fence that would be stronger next year than it was today. Time operated here like a second craftsman, finishing what your hands had started. I tried to imagine any part of my life that was structured to get better with waiting, that asked for it. It made my chest hurt a little. The man nodded to us without pausing, and as we left, he ran a hand along the finished section with a lover's gravity. By late afternoon, the wind shifted, and the smell of the town at distance arrived. Tanneries and cooking, and a sweetness like rot that meant a market had emptied, and the detritus was teaching the street a lesson in biology. The girl said we'd go tomorrow, perhaps, if we could spare eggs to sell. The idea of tomorrow pressed on my skull with the pressure of a headache. I was not built for one day here, much less two. My feet throbbed in their stiff leather shoes, and I had invented new blisters in places sandals had never warned me about. I had been thirsty since morning, in a way that wasn't quenched by anything this place called drink, and hungry in a way that did not equate to cravings so much as the distant ringing of a bell I couldn't walk toward fast enough. A cry went up near the far end of the village, and everyone moved at once. A thatch had caught fire, where a cooking pot had boiled over and kissed the straw with flame. Fire, in a thatched village, is a kind of god you must appease with speed and noise. Buckets appeared, a human chain formed, and the air filled with smoke and screamed instruction. I fell into line because there was no other choice that made sense. Water from hand to hand, a rhythm like a heartbeat, and the flame that had thought itself a master discovered the humility of wet. When it was over, the cottage was blackened but standing, and everyone looked at everyone else and laughed with the giddy rudeness of people who had not lost everything today. The woman whose house it was wiped her face with her sleeve and then stared into the distance, calculating what had burned and what it would cost in time, which was to say in life. Evening rode in on a gorgeous horse that no one had invited. The sky turned the color of iron that has just seen a forge, then spilled into violet and indigo. Smoke wrote curling letters against it. We ate again. Coarser bread, a stew with a rabbit's surrender in it, and the village softened around the edges. Someone pulled out a small instrument that looked like a cousin of a flute that had married a bird, and music tilted the air. The notes were simple, but they threaded themselves through my tiredness and reminded me that humans have always been capable of kindness to themselves, even when the world is ungentle. Children chased each other until a mother's voice cut the game short like scissors to fabric. The girl sat beside me, knees pulled to her chest, and leaned back on her palms, face upturned, as if trying to drink the barely warmth left in the sky. "Could you stay?" she asked, without looking at me, in a tone that asked 20 other questions without saying them out loud. "Are you useful? Are you trouble? Will you be a mouth we have to feed, or a back we can count on?" I thought of the world I had left, with its light that appeared when I hit a switch, and its water that never gave me a disease except boredom, and its meals that were choices performed with apps like spells. I thought of my hands, tender as unfired clay, and my lungs, already negotiating with smoke. I thought of laws that were not performed by a man with a cudgel and a mood, of medicine that believed germs were not demons, but little factual enemies you could trap in bottles. In every direction here, life was friction, and you needed to be a flint to survive it. I was not a flint. I was a match, bright for a second, then gone. Night, when it arrived, did not politely dim itself. It slammed down like a lid. The stars were shocking in their number, arrogant in their clarity, as if the sky had been waiting centuries for us to turn off our buzzing and really look. The milky smear of the galaxy elbowed its way across the darkness, and every myth anyone had ever told about gods and heroes felt like an honest attempt to paint over terror with glamour. The dark here had weight and personality. It could hide a wolf or a neighbor's resentment. It made the line between your thoughts and the world thin as parchment. We went back into this blackened cottage, and the hearth was coaxed back to life with a tenderness that would shame a lover. Heat seeped into the walls and then into us. I made a space on the straw again, aware now of the ecology of it, the mites, the fleas, the inevitable itch. The girl yawned and then set about checking every small thing that could be checked, because here, negligence was a sin that cost more than reputation. She ran her hands along the latch of the door, the edges of the shutter. She set a pot in a place where a stumble would not send it flying. She adjusted the pot hook above the fire so it would not be a perfect invitation to the sleeve of someone who would not wake up if they caught in flame. It wasn't paranoia. It was the muscle memory of 1,000 disasters taught to 1,000 daughters. The man of the house, who had spoken maybe 10 words all day, spoke 2 now. Tomorrow. Early. He looked at me like I was a borrowed tool, and in his gaze was a measuring, as if to say, if you break, I will not be surprised, but I also cannot afford to replace you. His forearms were cross-hatched with scars. The back of his hand bore the map of a life that included weather as an intimate cousin. He did not ask where I'd come from. Here, origin stories produced nothing you could put in a bowl. My body hurt in a way that radiated philosophy. Pain recentered me in a shape I hadn't known I had. Every place I bent or flexed had a complaint, and each complaint joined a chorus that sang, "You are too soft for this." At home, I might have taken a pill, stretched, tapped a screen, and had a stranger bring me something sauced and wrapped. Here, relief was earned or not at all. The relief we had was bread and warmth, and the fact that the roof had not burned. Rest came not like a choice, but like a truce, and only if you had negotiated well with the day. In the dark, I could hear the village talking to itself, a cow sighing, someone laughing too loudly at something they should not be laughing at, a baby's thin wail turning into a hiccup and then surrendering. Off in the trees, an owl asked its one question, and then, dissatisfied with the answer, asked it again. I thought of disease moving invisibly, of childbirth playing coin toss with women's lives, of teeth going black in mouths that smiled anyway, of men returning from fields with their backs broken into 2 ages, before and after. I thought of winter, waiting not with cruelty, but with indifference, like rain. If you were cold, it was not because winter hated you. It was because the world did not yet know how to be different, and you had to be different or die. Tomorrow's list wrote itself on the ceiling in smoke. More water, more wood, more work on the hedge, a walk to the market if luck was generous, a levy of the Lord's men that might ask for hands and give back nothing but hunger, mending the thatch. finding a lost chicken, facing a tooth that had crossed the line from ache into problem. The girl's breath beside me evened out. The man's snore began with the resigned vigor of someone who would wake at the smallest trouble, but took what rest he could in the cracks. I lay there, aware of every unreasonable luxury I had once thought of as a right, and realized that here we would not last a day without learning a different alphabet for the word need. Here, need is spelled with feet and ash and steam off a bowl in winter. It is spelled with your back. Every modern instinct I had was a traitor. The desire to sit when I should stand, to talk when I should haul, to choose when choices were an insult to people who knew the price of everything because they had paid it in mornings and broken nails. People say they would thrive if they were tested. They picture themselves with a sword and a stallion. No one imagines the day's true tests of boredom, of fear, of patience, of stooping and lifting in the rain. I thought I could bring something here and improve it, knowledge like a flame in my pocket. But knowledge without tools is a joke, and knowledge with tools is still a slow negotiation with wood and time and human bodies that get tired, then ill, then old, sometimes all at once. Explain germ theory to a woman who has already boiled the water as a rule because her grandmother did it and did not have a name for what she was fighting. Explain nutrition to a man whose hunger is not a concept. Tell a child that if they wash their hands, they will live to be 47 with most of their teeth, and then hand them soap that you do not have. The fire sighed and drowsed. The fleas discovered my waist like tourists at a landmark. Sleep came like a traveler who sat down uninvited and put his feet up anyway. As I fell, I felt the edge of panic that had visited me all day gently fold itself into resignation. I was not made for this century, not because I was weak, exactly, but because I was tuned to a different key. The people around me were not braver than saints. They were simply built by necessity to endure. There is no moral prize for surviving hard things when hard things are daily bread. There is, sometimes, a grin, a song, a patch of sun on a floor where a cat has found it and refuses to move. There is a child's game interrupted by a mother who knows too well that the dark does not owe anyone kindness. There is a hedge that will be stronger next year. If I stayed, I would learn. My hands would harden. My expectations would sit down and be quiet. But the thing you can't teach a body in a night is the quiet understanding that every mouthful is a miracle created by ours, that every dry bed is a small victory you can neither post about nor repay. It is slow, unphotogenic glory, and it is beyond most of us raised on instant ease. We can marvel at it from a safe, warm room and declare we would do fine. We would not. Not yet. Not without failing in 100 small ways that would cost other people, not just ourselves. Not without breaking and being remade, and then forgetting the words we used to use for comfort. Outside, the owl asked its question a final time. The village breathed. The world kept its own secrets. Morning would come too soon, and the day would be long and unforgiving and beautiful in a way that didn't care if I noticed. And I, who had spent one day in the Middle Ages, already knew that the stories we tell about hardship are neat, and the hardship itself is not. It is awkward and repetitive and wholly with ordinary effort. It makes saints out of people who would rather just be left alone. It would make or unmake me, and that was the quiet truth. Here, we do not last a day unless we are willing to become someone else. Someone who knows how to lift the bucket, who keeps the fire from catching the roof, who seals the shutter before the wind turns from friend to judge, who trusts the bells to tell time because watches are made by hands that have already spent a lifetime learning how to shape them. Here, the clock is a set of lungs, a pair of arms, a back, and a will. Here, the price of one day is everything. I wake to wedges of cold prying between the slats of the shutter, and to breath that smokes in the air like a small, embarrassed ghost. The bells begin before my eyes are open, thin, insistent, calling not me, but time itself. The girl taps my shoulder with the back of her hand, a gentle percussion. Up, she says, as if there were another option. The straw remembers my shape, and so do the bites along my ribs, but the day does not care. The fire in the hearth is asleep and must be coaxed. She kneels and feeds it with patience, blowing until the embers accept their purpose. I have never before watched someone make warmth with their mouth and lungs, like sharing a secret in reverse. The first chore is the same as the second and the third. Water. The bucket's handle prints its opinion into my palm. We go in a line, her ahead, me behind, carrying the day's thirst like a mild punishment. The sky is the color of a metal pan left outside. The path to the river is a curriculum in balance. It has nothing to teach about fairness. Frost crusts the puddles in a thin pane that shivers and then shatters when you step on it. A sound like a small, surprised animal. She glances back to make sure I'm still upright, which I am, but only because I have learned that falling here is expensive. When the river lifts its surface to the bucket, I watch the little curling eddies, how they try to undo the circle. It takes me 2 trips to understand that if I keep my elbows in, my shoulders suffer less. My learning curve is visible and mocked by no one. Their silence is not cruelty, but economy. Back at the cottage, porridge becomes a verb. Barley, a handful of dried peas, rescued from the corners of a sack. A pinch of salt, salt that costs someone a walk and a bargain. The girl stirs with the focus of a clockmaker, scraping the sides with a wooden spoon whose handle has been shortened by generations of hands appropriating it to the fire's edge. She eats fast and efficiently, the way a cat drinks, and passes me my portion. I do the math of gratitude. The taste is an honest sentence of the day, plain and warm and heavy. The man sits with his back to the wall and his eyes half closed, measuring nothing and everything. When the spoon leaves my mouth, I feel heat spread outward through me in mapping lines. Comfort here is always a verb. We set out before the sun has staked the ground, because today is market day. And market day is what stands between the cottage and emptiness. The girl tucks 4 eggs, treasures disguised as ovals, into a small basket padded with straw, wraps a piece of rough cloth around a wedge of cheese, ties rabbit skins in a bundle, like strange flags. I carry what she tells me to carry. The man lifts a sack of barley over his shoulder like it weighs his name. He nods once, and we go. The road earns the word with mud. The ruts are not ruts, but trenches. We pass hedges bent from years of encouragement, tight woven as a grandmother's braid, and a field where two boys chase a pig that believes deeply in its right to be elsewhere. Our pace is a compromise between urgency and the reality of physics underfoot. The girl tells me 2 rules for the market in words even I can understand. Keep your purse where your fingers can feel it, and keep your mouth shut unless you are buying. I am happy to obey both. By the time the town walls rise, the sky has opened. A light drizzle that is less a rain than a reminder that the sky is in charge. The gatekeeper at the arch looks at our goods, looks at us, makes a mark on a board with something that is part carbon, part authority. A toll. It is not so much a fee as a declaration. In here, rules will be different and numerous. The smell announces itself before the view does. Tanneries by the stream are performing their rough miracles on skin. The air is a stew of urine and rot and future leather. I try not to breathe with my memory. The girl threads us through lanes that do not know the concept of straight. Here, the town huddles and hustles, shoulder to shoulder, stall to stall, a hive that makes noise instead of honey. Market is a tangle of voices pulling on each other. Fish lie on boards with their eyes still surprised. A woman with a tray of pies hawks them with a song that has survived more winters than I have birthdays. A man turns a roast on an iron spit and paints it with a brush made of twigs dipped in fat. The smell knocks me in the head with a brick made of hunger. The girl's hand is on my sleeve, and then on my elbow, and then gone, and then back again. One stall sells cloth the colors of words I have never needed to pronounce. Madder red, weld yellow, woad blue. A child runs directly under a horse. A gloved hand appears from nowhere and rights the child as if picking up a wayward loaf. At the bread stalls, the loaves are lined up like soldiers. The baker's wife uses a scale with little brass weights that ring like coins where they touch. A man in the town's livery stands near, watching transactions with a priest's solemnity. If weights are wrong, someone will spend an afternoon in the stocks, not as violence, but as reminder. A boy already sits in them, his head poking through a wooden hole, like a flower out of season. His expression a complicated mixture of penance and boredom. He kicked another boy's ankle during a trade. Someone says, not unkind. The law is a kind of theater that everybody knows the lines to. We sell eggs, one by reluctant one. The girl's voice is firm, not defensive, never pleading. She asks a price that is not outrageous and stands in it like a person stands in their own doorway. When I try to bargain for a small packet of salt for her, I say the number wrong, and the merchant's mouth does a twitch that could be laughter if this were a comedy. The girl steps forward, slides between us with a phrase like a knife, and the salt becomes ours for a price we can live with. She does not look at me as if I have failed. She is merely moving water around the rock of my ignorance. I learn that kindness here is often shaped like correction. We stop at a smithy that has annexed a corner of the lane. Iron bends under a hammer that hits with the authority of weather. Sparks fly in brief parabolas and die on the ground like small, exhausted stars. The smith's apron is stiffer than armor. He makes nails with the ease of a magician making scarves appear. Nails, the girl says, as if she is ordering a prayer. He counts them into her palm, each one a thin line that connects wood to purpose. I never thought about a nail as the difference between a shelter and a suggestion. Under a warped wooden eave, I find a man treating a line of patients whose ailments are catalogued on their faces. He is a practitioner of medicine by reputation and bravery. His tools are thin knives, cups, a handful of dried bulbs tied with string, and a book whose pages are not consulted often. He opens his hand to me, shows me a leech, as if it is a coin that could buy health. A woman with a cough, as steady as a drumbeat, offers a chicken in exchange for relief. He nods, sets a cup against her skin, draws blood to the surface with a heat and a pressure that looks like belief. I step back and the world tilts. The girl tugs me away before I become part of the floor. Eat, she orders, pressing into my hand a heel of bread and a wedge of onion that has ambitions to be a weapon. The onion wins tears from me with no argument. It is, frankly, effective medicine for faintness. The rain is less gentle now. A watchman with a cudgel strolls like a punctuation mark through the sentences of the crowd. At a crossroad of streets, a man stands on an upturned barrel and announces a proclamation in a voice trained for stone and echo. Taxes, harvest tallies, a new rule about who may sell wool and where. My ear catches only the shape of it, but the faces around me alter, tighten a degree. The man's mouth makes a word that could be war and drops it into the street like a dull blade. The townspeople do not pick it up. They step around it and continue to purchase onions and lengths of yarn and the very idea of tomorrow. We trade rabbit skins for a small jar of lamp oil, a luxury that will lengthen a winter day by a thin border. We exchange the cheese for a spool of thread and a comb with teeth fine enough to interrogate lice. The comb is the most intimate object I have ever touched in public. It promises a small clarity against the murmur of inescapable discomfort. When the man with the ledger and the badge brings the conversation of tithes into the square, the girl looks away, not because she will not pay, but because while you hand over coin or grain, you do not also hand over your face. The church takes its tenth as the price of keeping time. There are worse taxes, like hunger. By mid-afternoon, the town is all wet wool and impatience. We are heavier with purchase, but lighter by other measures. Our cloaks drink rain and become burdensome. Two stubborn pets draped over our shoulders. The girl leads us toward the gate with the calm of someone who has memorized every path by the position of every puddle. We pass a side lane where a man sits on a stool and mends shoes with needles the size of my fingers. He lifts his head in that way people have here, which is to say not really up but out, like a dog pricking its ears. Your soles, he says to me, and points. Mine are blisters held together by politeness. The girl haggles. The man keeps his thumbs moving through leather. I step into shoes that are themselves already stories. and I could weep with the relief of it if I had not spent my tears on an onion. Civilization is sometimes a strip of cowhide and twine. The walk home is a test of will disguised as geography. The road has turned from compromise to enemy. A cart ahead of us breaks an axle. The two men with it stare at the broken wood as if trying to convince it to unbreak. We help lift, wedge a fallen branch as a brace, tie a rope that is mostly confidence. It will get them to the next bend, and not farther, but the next bend is not nothing. In the fields, crows congregate on a plow as if discussing strategies. The town recedes behind us like a story that refuses to end. When the cottage appears, it does so the way a boat appears to a swimmer who is out too far. Suddenly, and with such relief, it makes me lightheaded. The man unloads the barley with a grunt that has an entire language hidden in it. The girl unties our parcels, sets them in a careful line, a parade of small victories. She hangs the comb by the hearth like a relic. We are damp to the bone. Fire takes us back in like prodigal children. That evening, the village gathers in the long, low room of the neighbor whose father has died at a respectable age, which is to say not in infancy and not none at all. Respectable here is an achievement that requires no applause, because the cost is already known to everyone in the room. The body lies under a linen sheet that has seen a wedding and a christening, and now this. The priest murmurs words that knit their way up to the rafters and stay there, catching on cobwebs. Women move around the edges of grief with bowls and cloths and quiet competence. I stand where the girl puts me, hold a candle whose light makes my face feel warmer, and try not to think of the germs I could name and the failures I can do nothing about. The old man's fingers, visible where the sheet draws narrow at his hands, have the bold scars of work. No one in this room wants speeches about meaning. They want wood that does not betray, crops that do not rot, children who do not run fevers for 3 nights and then stop making sound. When we step back into the air, night has sharpened. The stars are less theatrical than last night and more numerous, as if someone had spilled a basket of seed. The girl's step is shorter. Grief is a heavy thing you can carry and still cook, but only just. She walks beside me without speaking until we reach the door, and then she says, "Name?" She touches her chest. I say mine, finally remembering it, after 2 days of leaving it at the river. "Alice," she says, and I'm relieved to have a name to wrap around her. It fits her like something she grew into, not like something given on a random day. Pain wakes me at some hour that refuses to be named. My stomach has decided to rearrange its loyalties. The ladle of river water, or the onion, or simply the ancient enterprise of bacteria, has begun a lecture that my body is unable to schedule. I step outside and the cold slaps me awake, but the relief is temporary. I discover that privacy is a hobby and not a right. In the dark, crouched behind a low hedge, I learn new humility. In the morning, my face will be gray with the kind of exhaustion that is not sleep deprivation, but an organ-level negotiation. Elise notices before she uses her words. She presses a cup into my hands, an infusion of something bitter that has a future. "Motherwort," she says, and something else. The taste is not pleasant, but it is not my vote that matters. I drink, and my insides feel like a council that has stopped shouting over itself and agreed to listen to facts. My gratitude has moved beyond language into a place where I would wash the soles of her feet with my tears if I hadn't wasted them on the onion, and if water were not a commodity that must be carried. We do not rest. That is the truth this place tells again and again, gently, and with no negotiable terms. There is a hedge to be mended, where the neighbor's pig found a thesis-shaped hole. There is a thatch to patch, because the rain found its own way in. The nails we purchased enter the day like small, triumphant commas. The man climbs onto the roof with the patient danger of someone who has no backup plan for falling. I hand him what he asks for, which is not words. Elise tucks her skirt into her belt and wades into chores with a vigor that borders on spiritual. She sings, and the song is not a song I know. It is more like a line thrown from her to the day, to pull it in closer. The melody rises and falls with the rhythm of her feet. It is not an incantation, but if the thatch holds, I will not argue with its effectiveness. At mid-morning, a woman bursts into the yard and takes hold of Alice's sleeve with a grip that is more than urgency. A baby is coming and will not wait for men to finish their grain, for roofs to be patched, for anything. Alice does not change expression because there is no useful expression for this. She shoves a basket into my arms, cloths, a knife, a cord, and I follow because I have become her shadow. We cross the village in a dozen strides that seem to burn the path behind us. Inside the room is heat and effort and breath. The mother grips the edge of the table hard enough to leave fingerprints in oak. Women move as if they share a mind, one by the window, one by the water, one at the mother's shoulder, whispering words that have nothing to do with the church and everything to do with pushing. Alice takes her place without ceremony, washes her hands with a briskness that scours the air, and begins the steady, unfussy work of keeping both doors open. The one that a child comes through, and the one that a mother does not go through today. I stand where I am told. I boil water, not because it is a spell, but because clean is a kind of prayer that works. I hand cloths. I learn that courage is not a shout. It is someone lying on a bed and refusing to let the world take their child and their life in the same hour. The baby comes with a cry that breaks and then becomes a sound I have never been so grateful to hear. It is small and angry at the cold and the audacity of this place we call here. Elise ties the cord with and cuts it as if it were the simplest task in the world. The mother collapses into relief like a house after a storm, all her beams in the right places. Someone puts the newborn to her chest, and the room's temperature changes by a degree that no instrument can record. I step outside on wobbling legs and sit on the low stone step and laugh like a fool because the alternative is to cry in a way that would use up everyone's patience. Ali emerges and throws a cloth over my shoulders and sits beside me, knees drawn up, their mud making careful prints on her shins. She does not look at me and say, "See?" She is too tired for victory. She says, "Bread," and hands me a piece. By afternoon, my stomach has decided to be a participant again, if a sulky one. The day shifts toward chores of mending and making. I watch a child thread a bone needle and run a line of stitches so small they seem to be secrets. I knead dough with hands, already patterned with new blisters, and feel the moment when the rough mass turns to something elastic and living. It is like sensing trust in a stranger. We spread the loaves with a thin glaze, the color of patience, and slide them into the mouth of the oven, which accepts them with a huff. When they come out, the scent makes me believe for a full minute that I could live here forever if only I could stand near this smell every day. Then the sky turns its face and shows us teeth. A wind from the west arrives like an unwelcome cousin, loud and convinced. The thatch mutters. Smoke in the cottage decides it is not going upward today. The door hugs its frame tighter and still finds that it lets in a seam of cold. We cover everything that has ever wanted to be dry. Alice checks the shutter latches again with that series of gestures that are her religion. Touch, tug, nod. The man stands in the doorway and measures the weather with his ear. He takes a length of rope and ties it where the roof meets the wall, and I finally understand why the hedges are woven and the fences are braided. Because everything here that is strong is made with interlocking purposes. The wind can pull at one branch, but not at a forest of them. In the storm, a shout comes thin from the lane. A calf is stuck in the ditch that pretends to be a stream on days like this, and a trap on days like this. We go as if pulled by a string. The calf is panic and wait. Mud is a personality with bad manners. The men dig with their hands, as if their fingers are shovels and time an enemy. Alice holds the head and talks in a low voice that is somehow audible over the wind. I push under the belly and count to 10, and then to 10 again, and then to a number I did not know I knew. When the calf comes free, it does so all at once, a decision instead of a process, and we fall backward, covered in a layer of the earth that feels like another skin. The farmer cries in the way a man cries here, silently, angrily, like the weather just insulted his mother. He nods to every one of us in turn, a payment that is not coin, and also is. We trudge home with mud in our socks and saints in our eyes. The cottage smells like wet sheep and victory. We eat stew so thin it could pass a needle, and yet it is delicious because it is hot, and because there is salt in it, and because our bodies are the kind of hungry that cleans plates. The lamp oil we bought turns one more inch of darkness into usable time. Elise leans over her stitching, her hair escaping its kerchief, and electing to be itself, brave and impertinent. The man sharpens a blade with a rhythm that sets my heartbeat to its metronome and calms me. I pull the comb through my hair and hear the faint, decisive clicks of tiny enemies losing battles they thought they had already won. Every small victory tonight feels like cheating death at cards. When sleep comes, it does so out of ambush. I sink. My last thought is not noble. It is the shape of the nail the smith made, the neat rightness of it, the way it joins insistence to wood. The storm plays drums on the roof, but the rope holds the thatch, and the thatch holds the idea of inside against the idea of out. I dream of water that is clean and comes when you turn a handle, and I wake to a bucket and am not angry. I dream of a switch that makes light and wake to a hearth and feel no loss. I dream that I am very old, and when I wake, I realize I am simply very tired. Morning does not wait to be asked. It arrives with that clear-eyed way of mornings, ready for another ledger's worth of debts and payments. My body has ceased its argument with itself and entered a truce. I move like a person who is learning a language and has just mastered a tense. Elise grins at me with half her mouth. "You do not die," she says, with the casual cruelty of affection. "Not yet," I answer, and she laughs, not because it is funny, but because laughter is bread too. The day is a mirror of the last, with new flaws in the glass. We work, we eat, we carry, we patch. I think often of leaving in a way that has nothing to do with walking. My mind stands up from my body and goes to a place with soap that smells of citrus and a bed that does not crunch. It returns chastened by the knowledge that I would bring none of this back except as stories. Stories do not boil water. Stories do not lift. Stories do not weave hedges that teach wind manners. At noon, when the bell calls us again to the stone that remembers more prayers than this village has names, we go. I kneel because everyone kneels, and because my knees have learned how. The priest's Latin folds itself around us and does its work. What work is that? To remind us that there is a calendar bigger than the one we scratch into the doorframe, with marks for eggs and births and roofs repaired. To say that someone is counting who does not need to sleep. I do not believe as they do. I believe differently and in other things, but I recognize the architecture of faith in their faces. It looks like the scaffolding we built outside the neighbor's cottage to lift a beam into place. It keeps a roof up. I do not know how I leave. That is the truth. Maybe I do not. Maybe I stay, and a version of me with thicker hands and dimmer vocabulary learns to tie knots without thought and to listen to the weather with his jaw. Maybe I go and turn on a tap and weep at its simplicity. A thing happens on the path by the hedge. Elise stops and picks a sprig of something green and presses it into my palm. It smells of pepper and earth. "For your stomach," she says. I close my hand around it like a closing book. "For your road," I say, and I mean both roads, the one that leads to the stream we always return to, and the one that leads away to where I came from, where 2 days of this have become a cathedral in my head. I take the last load of water like a blessing that is also a chore. My feet, in their mended shoes, know where to go. The cottage stands like a sentence without a period, unfinished, ongoing, as all homes are. The man nods to me and then to the door as if it has asked a question. Ali grins that half grin, and then the other half shows up, late but present. "Do not forget the nail," she says, and I am absurdly close to saying I will name my firstborn after it. "I will not forget," I say instead, because this is a place that will not tolerate lies that large. I step out into a day that is not waiting for me. The village exhales in smoke and steam. The bell switches sides of the sky. My shadow, for a brief and unearned moment, looks like it belongs here. Then the light moves, and it belongs to nowhere. which is closer to the truth. I carry the sprig Elise gave me, like a compass that points to the nearest honesty. When the path bends, it does not ask whether I am ready. It simply bends. I go because there is no standing still here that is not also falling behind. You want me to survive here for a day or two? I can, if I am protected by the patience of people who have no patience to spare. I can, if I am permitted to borrow competence and repay it with effort. But alone, without a choir of hands that know the low, constant song of keeping, I last an afternoon before the bucket tips, before the door's latch does not sit right, before the wind finds the way, the thatch was not woven tight. You cannot muscle modernity into this century, like a trunk into a small door. You must instead become thinner and stronger and more interlaced, like a hedge that has learned to be a wall by living. So here is the truth I carry away, tucked like a nail in my pocket. The Middle Ages are not a theme park of hardship and heroics. They are spilt milk and splinters and socks that will not dry for 3 days, and a baby that lives because 5 women all did the right thing at the right second without looking up to be thanked. They are nights when the stars insult you with their beauty, while your fingers sting from washing a pot in cold water. They are men who cry by staring at a fire bow too hard, and women who laugh while catching a falling ember with their bare hands, and a child who learns to braid straw into something that might become a roof. And they are the truth that comfort is not a right here. It is an accomplishment. It is a beam lifted, and a rope tied, and a loaf risen, and a cup of small beer passed to a stranger with the authority of a sacrament. I do not last here because I deserve to. I last because Elise decided I could, just for 2 days, just into the thin crease of a storm, just long enough to understand my softness and the price other people pay for it. I go, and the bells call someone else to water, and the smith hammers iron into insistence, and the calf grows into a cow that will pull a plow through a spring so muddy it can only be remembered as a joke later. I go, and the comb hangs by the hearth, and the rope stays tight, and the hedge thickens itself in the quiet, and a new mother wakes at midnight, listens to her baby breathe, and decides to breathe too. I go, and if I close my eyes in a room full of lights that come from nowhere, and swear that I can smell smoke in my hair and barley on my hands, maybe I can. Maybe the world put it there, so I won't forget how much a day can cost when a day is made by hand. If I am honest, I would not survive 3 days without becoming someone unrecognizable to myself, someone with different priorities, and a back that speaks a different grammar. That is the part that frightens me, and the part that I admire. The people here do not wake and think about courage. They wake and think about kindling and water, and whether the sky is going to cooperate. They do not know the names of their bacteria. They know to boil water, and to bury their dead, and to sing when they patch a thatch. Not because the song changes anything, but because it keeps their hands going. They are not heroes. They are accurate. I think of Elise, who will grow older into the shape of someone's mother, or not, into the shape of a woman who knows how to make a hedge, a wall, and a girl a woman. I think of the man who will die with scars that are maps, and someone will put a sheet over him that has seen too much, and then the bells will balance a ledger that is not mine to read. I think of the calf, which will pull, and of the onion, which will demand tears honestly, and of the nail, which will hold until rust asks it to let go. And it will say, "Fine, but not today." I leave carrying a sprig and a nail, and a memory of the taste of small beer, and the sound of a baby arguing with the cold. And I say to myself, and to whatever future insists on listening, we could not last a day here, as we are, not without breaking and remaking, not without falling and being hauled up by hands that do not ask our names. But that is not a shame. It is a lesson. We are, in our comfortable rooms, made of the same stuff that boiled water over smoke and whistled at the wind and laughed after the roof did not burn. We have simply forgotten how many hands it takes to keep a house from being a story about fire. And if anyone asks me what the Middle Ages were like, I will hand them a bucket and a comb and a nail and say, "Start here, then listen for the bells. They will tell you everything."